I got caught staring at her in the worst possible way. Not a smooth glance either. Not one of those casual looks a guy can maybe pretend was about the wall, or the route, or literally anything else in the room. I was standing near the chalk station at the climbing gym, holding my water bottle like an idiot, watching her finish a problem on the overhang, and when she dropped down and turned, she looked straight at me. I froze. There was no recovery. No believable excuse. I did that thing where I looked away too late, which somehow makes it worse, because now it looks like you were staring and also bad at lying. I remember unscrewing my bottle cap even though I wasn't thirsty, then tightening it again like I suddenly had a very serious meeting with the lid. Her name, at that point, I didn't even know yet. I just knew she'd started showing up on the bouldering side a couple weeks earlier, usually around the same time I got there after work. I'm Noah Bennett, 30, Municipal Traffic Systems Technician for the city, which sounds more impressive than it is. Mostly I deal with signal timing complaints, maintenance scheduling, people convinced one bad red light has ruined their lives, and whatever roadwork is making everyone angry that week. It's fine. I like work that makes sense. I like systems. I like things that can be adjusted. My life outside work was basically built the same way. Same grocery store. Same breakfast place on Saturdays. Same climbing gym 3 evenings a week in this old converted building east of downtown, where half the block used to be warehouses and now everything had coffee, bikes, or exposed brick. I liked knowing where everything was. Which regulars wore headphones. Which routes would get crowded. Which staff member would forget to reset the green problems. Then she started showing up, and suddenly I was acting like a teenager with a head injury. She wasn't loud. That was part of it. She didn't do that thing some people do where they perform being good at climbing for the whole room. She just studied the wall, tied her hair back, and moved like she already knew exactly what she trusted and what she didn't. Calm. Focused. A little hard to read. I kept noticing her without wanting to look obvious about it, which of course made me more obvious. I'd drift toward whatever section she was near and then pretend to examine footholds. I'd take water breaks at suspiciously bad times. Once I spent a full minute staring at a route card upside down because she was standing 10 feet away and I panicked. So when she caught me that night, I knew I was done. I left early out of pure embarrassment. Didn't even finish my usual circuit. I told myself I'd skip a few days, let the whole thing cool off, maybe come back next week and hope she forgot my face. Outside, the air still had that early spring chill where winter hadn't fully let go. I was heading toward my truck when I saw her standing near the bike rack by the sidewalk, hands in the pockets of a light jacket, like she'd been waiting for somebody. Then I realized she was waiting for me. I actually looked behind me first. That's how bad I am in situations like that. She smiled, just enough to show she knew exactly what was happening. "Are you planning to keep doing that thing?" she said. "Where you study route maps only when I turn around?" I think I said, "Wow," which is not a sentence. Then I tried again. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to be weird. That's still under review," she said. I laughed, mostly because I had no defense left. She stepped a little closer, still amused, not mean about it. "For the record, I noticed you like 2 weeks ago." I just couldn't decide if you were shy, strange, or very bad at hiding interest. I was hoping for shy. You didn't sell it consistently. That should have been humiliating, but somehow it wasn't. Or not fully. Because she was teasing me, yes, but she was also there, outside, after the gym, having clearly decided to talk to me. That part hit me a second later and almost made me lose the thread again. "I'm Noah," I said. "I know," she said, then smiled at my face. "From check-in." "I'm Elena." There was a late coffee window a block down, built into the corner of an old brick building that used to be some kind of print shop. We ended up walking there without either of us fully proposing it. The conversation got easy faster than it should have. Elena had recently moved back to Cincinnati after a few years away and was trying to rebuild some kind of routine that actually felt like hers. I told her I liked places where nobody expected you to be interesting right away. She laughed at that. That might be the most honest thing anybody's said to me this month. It's a low-energy lifestyle. It reads more like controlled damage prevention. That too. She told me she liked climbing because it forced her to pay attention to one thing at a time. I told her I liked it because walls made more sense than people. She leaned against the counter with her tea and said, "You seem like a person who'd rather be useful than impressive." I shrugged. Useful is easier. Useful is underrated, she said. That line stuck with me more than it probably should have. By the time we got back to the parking area, I didn't want the conversation to end, but I also had no clue how a man like me was supposed to close a night like that without ruining it. Elena solved that too. She unlocked her car, then looked at me over the roof. "You usually climb Thursdays too?" "Yeah," I said. "Most weeks." "Good," she said. "I'd rather not have to pretend our next conversation happened by accident." Then she got in, gave me one last small smile, and drove off, leaving me in the lot like my brain had been unplugged. I stood there for a full minute before getting in my truck. Because all the way through the gym, I thought I was the one secretly watching her. Turns out she noticed long before I ever understood I was being noticed back. After that night outside the gym, things did not turn into some big sweeping romance right away. It was smaller than that, which honestly made it feel more real. Thursday came, and I spent most of the workday pretending I was normal. I answered complaints about mistimed left-turn arrows, coordinated around a utility crew closing half a lane near Clifton, and told myself I was absolutely not thinking about whether Elena would actually show up. Then I got to the gym 10 minutes early anyway. She was already there, sitting on the mat with one shoe on, flipping through a little pocket notebook. When she looked up and saw me, she smiled like this had already become expected. "Good," she said. "I was starting to think you changed gyms out of shame." I considered it. "I know." That became our tone fast. Easy, a little dry, never forced. We climbed together that night, and then again the next week, and after that it stopped feeling accidental in any way. Sometimes we worked the same problems. Sometimes we made fun of each other's terrible route choices. Sometimes we ended up talking more than climbing. Elena worked at a regional audiology center as a children's hearing specialist. It fit her in a way that made immediate sense once she told me. She had this calm, steady way of speaking, like she never wasted words but never made anybody feel rushed either. She told me the hardest part of her job usually wasn't the kids. It was the parents, because half the time they came in scared and trying not to show it. "I spend a lot of my days saying, very gently, the same thing 4 different ways," she told me one night as we stood under a slab wall. "That sounds exhausting." "It is. But I'm good at it." "You definitely are." She looked at me for a second longer than usual after I said that, then tapped the route card with one finger. "You overanalyze climbs the way other people overanalyze tax forms." "I work in traffic systems. Patterns are my whole personality." "I believe that," she said. "You probably judge intersections for fun." "I absolutely do." "See? Disturbing." Some nights after the gym we'd get tacos from a truck near the riverfront, and sit at a metal table even when it was still a little cold out. Other nights we'd get tea from a quiet cafe with mismatched chairs and bad acoustic music playing too softly to complain about. A couple times we just sat in my truck talking long after we'd parked because either of us made a move to leave. That was the part that got me. It never felt like I had to win her over. She was just there, in it with me, asking questions that made me feel more interesting than I usually did. She learned I noticed tiny stuff without meaning to. Timing changes in streetlights, new cracks in sidewalks, when a coffee shop moved their chairs half an inch closer together, and somehow made the room worse. I learned she kept handwritten lists for everything. Groceries, errands, route ideas, books people told her to read. Every now and then she'd pull out that little notebook and add something while I was still talking. "You're writing that down?" I asked once. You said that weird intersection near your apartment has a light cycle that punishes honesty. It does. That line belongs to me now. So yeah, I liked her. A lot. More every week, if I'm being honest. But it still lived in that strange space where nothing had been clearly named. We weren't having big talks about what this was. We were just building this routine that felt better than anything I'd had in a while. Then I started noticing the other thing. It was subtle at first. She'd check her phone and go quiet for half a minute. Or she'd cancel climbing with a reasonable explanation that didn't sound fake, but still felt like part of something bigger. Once she showed up late and seemed present but thinner somehow, like part of her attention was still somewhere else. She was never cold with me. That almost would have been easier. She was warm, just distracted in flashes. I didn't push. That's not really how I'm built anyway. And with Elena, pushing would have felt wrong. She had a way of making it clear she'd tell you what she wanted to tell you when she was ready. One Tuesday I pulled into the lot and saw her car near the side entrance. I almost headed in without thinking. Then I noticed she was already inside it, both hands resting on the steering wheel, not moving. She wasn't falling apart. It was quieter than that. She just looked like someone trying to become steady enough to walk into a room and act normal. I stood there for maybe 2 seconds too long, debating whether to leave her alone. Then she turned and saw me through the windshield. A second later she opened the door and gave me a smile that arrived a little late. "Hey," she said. "Hey." I leaned against the frame of the car. "Do you actually want to climb tonight?" She looked at me, really looked at me. Then she shook her head once. "Not even a little." "Okay," I said. "Want to walk instead?" She said yes so fast it told me everything. We ended up heading down the block with no real destination, just moving because that felt easier than standing still. The air smelled like rain even though it hadn't started yet. For a while she didn't say much. I didn't fill the silence. Finally she exhaled and said, "My dad's not doing great." I turned toward her, but didn't interrupt. She kept her eyes ahead. "He's had a few small strokes over the past year. At first it was little things. Repeating himself. Losing track of appointments. Getting confused by stuff he used to handle without thinking. Lately it's getting harder to pretend it's still minor." That was the first time I understood why she'd moved back. "My brother lives out of state," she said. "My mom's been gone a long time. So right now it's mostly me trying to manage doctors, his house, his moods, my job, all of it." She said it plainly, no dramatic pause, no attempt to make it sound bigger than it was. That somehow made it hit harder. I asked a couple practical questions and let her answer what she wanted. Was he alone? Mostly yes. Was he safe? Usually. Was she getting any real help? Not enough. She glanced at me then, like she was bracing for the usual lines people say when they don't know what else to do. But I didn't have any of those. The truth was it sounded hard, and unfair, and tiring in a way that probably never shut off. "That's a lot to carry by yourself," I said. Her shoulders dropped a little. Just a little, but I saw it. "Yeah," she said. "It is." We walked another block in quiet. This time it didn't feel tense. More like she didn't have to hold the whole thing up by herself for a minute. When we got back to the lot, she stood by her car with her keys in one hand and looked at me in that calm, direct way she had. "Thanks," she said. "For what?" "For not saying anything useless." I almost smiled. "I can be very quiet when needed." "Noah." "What?" "That was not me complimenting your silence." I laughed, and she did too, but softly. Then her face changed again, gentler this time. "I'm serious," she said. "Thank you." After she drove away, I stayed there longer than I meant to. Because up to that point, whatever was happening between us had been light and easy and kind of exciting in a way that still felt safe. But that walk was different. It mattered in a heavier way. And standing there alone, I realized I wasn't just looking forward to seeing her anymore. I cared. enough that it already felt a little dangerous. After that walk, something changed between us, but not in a simple way. Elena started letting me into more parts of her life, and at first I took that as a good sign. Maybe because I wanted to. Maybe because it felt good to be the person she called when things got messy and she didn't want to explain from the beginning. It started small. She asked if I knew a decent electrician because her dad had begun leaving kitchen lights on, and once forgot he'd turned the stove dial the wrong way. Another time she called me from outside a pharmacy and said, "Can I ask you a stupid question?" I told her she could ask me several. She let out a tired breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "He's been more confused this week, and I can't tell if I'm noticing more because I'm stressed or because it's actually getting worse." I stayed on the phone with her while she sat in the parking lot and talked it through. Not like I had some grand answer. I just helped her sort the practical side from the panic side. What had changed, what hadn't, what needed a note for the doctor, what was just one rough day. She said thank you in that quiet way she had when she meant it. And after we hung up, I sat there with my phone in my hand and had a thought I really did not enjoy. What if the center of this whole thing wasn't that she liked me the way I liked her? What if I was just useful at the exact right moment? I hated thinking that, mostly because it made me feel petty. Elena had never been careless with me. She never acted like my time belonged to her. But once the thought showed up, it stayed. Then she invited me to a weekend community fundraiser, and I made the mistake of treating it like more than it was. Not in some huge dramatic way. I just let myself think maybe this was the first thing that was clearly date-shaped. She said it was for a neighborhood hearing access program and asked if I wanted to come. I showed up in a nicer shirt than usual and spent the first 10 minutes realizing she had not brought me there because she wanted candlelight and meaningful eye contact. She needed another steady pair of hands. Her dad was there. The room was crowded, louder than he liked, and halfway through the event he got turned around enough that he stopped recognizing where the exit was. Not fully gone, not a scene, just confused and embarrassed in a way that made everyone around him tense up. I helped Elena guide him outside without making it feel like we were steering him somewhere. We slowed everything down. I talked to him about the weather, then about a road closure near his street, then about nothing important at all until his shoulders loosened. It worked. He settled. Elena looked at me like she could have fallen asleep from relief. But on the drive home, I felt lower than I wanted to admit. Because she had been grateful, deeply grateful, and still I couldn't stop thinking that what mattered most to her might be that I was calm, available, and nearby. Not that she wanted me. Not really. Just that I made hard days less hard. After that, I pulled back a little. Not enough to make a point. I wasn't trying to punish her. I just got more careful. I answered her messages, but I stopped reading hope into every pause and every look. At the gym I was still warm with her, just less open. Less willing to lean into the part that wasn't clearly named. Of course she noticed. Elena noticed everything. A week later my department sent me to inspect a pedestrian crossing request near her audiology center. Parents had been filing complaints because the signal timing near the entrance didn't leave enough crossing time for families with strollers and kids moving slow. I was there taking notes, checking sight lines, looking at the push-button placement, when one of the women at the front desk saw my badge and said, "Oh, you're Noah Bennett." I looked up. "Yeah." She smiled like she'd solved something. "So you're that Noah?" I asked what that meant. She said, "Elena recognized your name ages ago." That stayed with me all afternoon. Later, when I saw Elena, I asked her about it while we were sitting on the padded bench near the training wall. I kept my voice light, but she could tell it mattered. She looked down for a second, then back at me. "I was going to tell you. I just didn't know when." "Tell me what?" She folded her hands together. "A few years ago my dad kept filing city complaints about the signal near his street. The crossing time was too short for him once he started slowing down. Most people ignored it. You didn't." I stared at her. She gave me a small, apologetic smile. He remembered your name because you actually called him back. He talked about you more than once. Said you were the guy from the city who followed through. I didn't know what to say to that. It had been a minor adjustment. One of 100 small cases I'd handled. When I saw Bennett on the check-in screen at the gym, I knew it from somewhere, she said. Then I realized where. So when you came up to me outside, it wasn't random, she said. But it wasn't only that either. That was the hard part. And the good part. Both at once. Because suddenly I understood that I had mattered to her before she ever spoke to me, but not in the clean romantic way I'd been hoping for. I was tied to safety, reliability, her father, all of it. I wasn't just some guy she noticed across a room. But I also wasn't just convenient. A few nights after that, her dad wandered off after sunset and was found a few blocks away, confused and cold and irritated that everyone was making such a fuss. He was all right, but when Elena told me about it, her voice had changed. She wasn't just tired anymore. She sounded scared of what came next. I met her outside her apartment. We stood there beside my truck with the streetlights on and the air going cool around us. She looked like she'd been holding herself together on pure habit. I keep asking for help from you, she said quietly. And I know how that can look. I started to tell her it was fine, but she shook her head. No, let me say this right. The reason it feels dangerous is that I don't only think of you as help. That was all. She didn't dress it up. She didn't fully explain it. She just gave me that much, and it was enough to keep me standing there long after she went inside. After Elena said that, things did not suddenly become simple. In some ways they got harder, because now the feeling was out in the open just enough that I couldn't pretend I was imagining it, but not so fully that either of us could lean on a neat definition and relax. And on top of that, her dad's situation was clearly moving toward a decision she had been trying not to make. The wandering incident did it. Not because it was dramatic. Honestly, the worst part was how ordinary it sounded when she described it later. He had gotten mixed up, gone out at the wrong time, kept walking, and by the time someone helped get him home he was more annoyed than frightened. But that was exactly the problem. A man could disappear in a calm, everyday way just as easily as in some big obvious emergency. So the next couple of weeks became about practical things. Real things. Home safety options. Medication organizers. Door alarms. Whether part-time in-home help was enough or just another delay before the same decision. I helped where I could. I researched places. I drove Elena to visit 2 assisted living communities with memory care units nearby. I asked questions she forgot to ask when she was tired. I kept my opinions clear but light. It was never my call to make, and I knew that. That mattered to her, I think. I never tried to sweep in and become the solution. I just stayed. One of the places felt cold in that polished way some places do, where everything is technically nice but nobody looks fully alive. The second one was smaller, less impressive, but calmer. The staff knew residents by name. The courtyard had raised planters and a row of cheap wind chimes. Elena stood beside me in the parking lot afterward and stared straight ahead for a long time. This is the first place that didn't make me feel like I was betraying him, she said. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, that probably means something. She nodded, but she still looked wrecked. The hardest day came later. Her dad had one of those clearer stretches where he understood more than usual. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to see that Elena was worn down. Enough to understand that people were speaking more carefully around him. Enough to realize his life was being discussed in terms he never wanted attached to himself. I wasn't there for that conversation, and I shouldn't have been. That was theirs. I only saw Elena afterward. She called and asked if I could come by. When I got there, she was sitting on the back steps behind his house in the thin evening light, elbows on her knees, looking like she had aged 5 years in a week. He agreed, she said before I even sat down. I took the step below her and waited. He said he doesn't like the idea, and he hates that I'm right. She let out one dry laugh that broke in the middle. Then he told me he knows he's scaring me. That one got to her. Not loudly. Elena was not loud even when she was falling apart. She just pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a second and breathed in like she was trying to keep herself from splitting in half. So I stayed there with her. That was it. No speech. No bright side. No attempt to turn a painful thing into a meaningful lesson. After a while she leaned against my shoulder and said, "I don't know how to be relieved and heartbroken at the same time." I said, "Probably exactly like this." Once the move was arranged, life changed in a way that was both better and strange. The daily emergency pressure dropped. There were still appointments and forms and guilt and all the leftover emotion, but the constant fear eased. Her dad adjusted more peacefully than she expected. Not perfectly, but enough that she could sleep without her phone in her hand. And with that relief came a new fear for me. Because I had wanted this for her. Of course I had. But once she stopped needing so much practical help, I started wondering whether the closeness would fade with the crisis. Maybe that had been the structure holding us together. Maybe ordinary life would reveal that I had mostly just been useful during one brutal season. Then Elena started choosing me in ways that had nothing to do with emergencies. She asked me to come over on a Tuesday for no reason except that she wanted company and had takeout. She texted me a picture of a badly designed merge lane with the message, "This feels personally offensive to you." She asked whether I wanted to take a day trip to a sandstone climbing area outside the city once things settled down a little more. No hidden problem. No extra errand attached. Just me. That's when I started letting myself believe it. A week later we ended up back at the climbing gym late in the evening after helping sort the last boxes from her dad's house. We barely climbed. We were both tired. Mostly we just sat on the padded floor under the beginner wall where, months earlier, I had been doing an embarrassingly bad job of pretending not to stare at her. Elena rested her forearms on her knees and looked up at the holds. "When I came outside to talk to you that night," she said, "I didn't fully understand my own reasons." I smiled a little. "That's comforting." She nudged my arm. "You know what I mean." I did. "Yes, I thought you were attractive," she said. "Yes, I recognized your name. Yes, you felt safe. But what became important later was something else." I waited. "You never treated what I was carrying like it was the price of being close to me," she said. "You stayed when things were inconvenient. And awkward. And boring. And messy." I looked at the floor for a second because hearing something like that straight on is a lot when you've spent months trying not to assume too much. Then I told her the truth in the only way I really knew how. "I think I've been waiting to find out whether you wanted me in your life," I said, "or whether you just needed me during the worst part of it." Elena turned toward me fully then. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly why I trust you now." Then she kissed me. Not like a first spark. More like the clear answer to a question that had been sitting between us for a long time. A few weeks later we were at the gym again, and things felt different in the best way. Not dramatic. Just settled. Real. Her dad was doing better than expected in the new place. Elena looked lighter. Not carefree exactly, but more like herself again. At one point she nodded toward a guy on the next wall who was very obviously sneaking glances at a woman across the room and doing an absolutely terrible job hiding it. Elena bumped my shoulder and said, "That man needs professional coaching before he humiliates himself." I watched him for a second. "Some people recover from that kind of start just fine." She smiled without looking at me. "Are you still pretending you had any subtlety at all?" "No," I said. "I think I'm finally over that." And that was the nice part. What started with me getting caught looking at her like an idiot had somehow turned into something solid enough that we could laugh about it together. Like the awkward beginning had